Now, the Metropolitan Police has said climbing on a memorial is unfortunate but not illegal. Now, the force was criticised heavily for not arresting pro-Palestine protesters who scaled a monument at Hyde Park Corner this week.
Footage shared on social media shows a demonstrator draped in a Palestinian flag while speaking to an officer at the Royal Artillery Memorial, which commemorates the nearly 50,000 soldiers from the Royal Artillery killed in the First World War.
And another demonstrator who is clutching a Palestinian flag can be seen running across parts of the top of the monument, which is around 9 metres high. Disgraceful scenes that really, it has to be said, have angered a lot of people in GB Newsland this week. And joining us now is former Divisional Commander in the Metropolitan Police, Davies. Outrageous scenes in many people's eyes, and yet here we have the Chief of the Met saying, no laws breaking, nothing we can do, move along as you were.
Well, good morning. As I said previously, I don't agree with the Commissioner, and I think there's enough evidence there to test the case in the courts under Section 5(1) of the Public Order Act of 1986. Certainly, it caused me distress. It caused a number of your viewers distress. And it could have caused distress possibly to the officer on the scene, because police officers can be distressed. And certainly, as far as I'm concerned, it was sacrilege. Can you imagine if one of these YOBS had done that to something dear to another quarter in this country, some of the Islamic faith? Can you imagine what would have happened? Their little backsides would have been arrested before they could say Jack Robinson. So it does appear, in my opinion, that we are treating some elements in society very differently to others.
Di, there's been a lot of talk about the idea of new laws to make it actually illegal to climb on monuments. In your view, is that necessary, or is it just a case of the police are failing to enforce laws that we've already got, and they're just, as you suggest there, being too lax on certain kinds of protesters?
Well, it may be a case of both, really. I've been looking at the Police Courts and Sentencing Act, which came in a year ago, and wondering whether perhaps an amendment could be made to that. Because quite clearly, we can't tolerate anyone desecrating, as these men appear to have done, with impunity, really. We've got to bring in something. And if the Commission or if the courts don't enforce current laws, as they often don't these days, and they don't send out deterrent sentences, then perhaps we need to look at it again. But as I say, I think probably there's sufficient legal ability for the police to act, but they have to be told to do so. And it would appear as if you get from the top that kind of what I call wishy-washy direction, or no direction at all, then clearly something has to be done. You know, I've had so many police officers get in touch with me since I was last on your programme, talking about this, saying there is a two-tier policing. Now, if they're thinking it, there's something chronically wrong, isn't there?
Yeah, and Di, part of the problem here is that the law in place, the Desecration of War Memorials Act 2020, the threshold means you have to physically vandalise it or cause damage. And many people are saying that needs to be modified because it's been overtaken by protesters, because protesters historically would never dream of climbing on these memorials. But since the Black Lives Matter era and now the pro-Palestine March era, there is a change of mindset, so we need to have a change of law. And in America, they make special dispensation for statues, for flags, for government buildings, and it's an immediate breach of law if you do anything to it. Surely it's time for that in Britain.
Well, yes, I agree with you. As I say, if we can't prosecute under the current laws, then there needs to be urgent action by the Home Office and others to bring forward legislation to Parliament so we can protect it. You know, we've seen so much of late where people are not being arrested sufficiently, and there doesn't seem to be a deterrent in this country for those who lack the good manners and good grace towards all of us, really. And it's a sad indictment that we have now a small minority in this country, whether it's against the oil and so on and so forth, or Palestinian causes, that think they are above the law. Well, we've got to show like everyone, you have to obey the law and keep the king's peace. And again, if there's a threat of violence, I still say breach of peace is sufficient to actually detain them and stop them in their movements. If you want to go further, as I say, in terms of prosecuting, then the public order in many guises is sufficient. But I agree, if we've got to do more, then let's bring it forward, because I find it intolerable that police officers stand by watching this, or if they do come down when the little darlings are told to, they just let off and away they go. It's not good enough, and I think most of your viewers, and certainly most of the country, would agree with that.
An argument though, Di. I mean, I agree with you. I hate watching these protesters climb up our monuments. But if you come down too hard on them, if you end up sort of stamping out almost completely the right to protest, what about when, say, a Labour government comes in, for example, and perhaps if we got into a situation, God forbid, where there was another lockdown, and we saw lockdown protesters out, and those lockdown protesters were you know, almost completely silenced by the state. Don't you think you have to be a bit careful what you wish for?
No, there's a huge difference between lawful protest, which I'm in favour, if that's what you feel so extremely, although these days people seem to protest about virtually everything, and there has to be a limit. But no, I don't want the state to limit peaceful protests. And again, God forbid, if there is another lockdown, and God forbid, if for instance, any party gets in and they try to stop people, then no, that's perfectly legitimate. But I say again, you have to be peaceful. You have to respect the vast majority, and the vast majority in this country regard our war memorials as sacrosanct. And these YOBs who go up and think they can do it with impunity, for goodness sake, somebody in authority, somebody in the police, and we rely on the police. We have no one else to actually do it unless we take the law into our own hands. And that's the trouble. If it's perceived that the police leadership at various levels, and what frightens me is you now have people at assistant commissioner level who've got 7 years service, who came from Marks and Spencer's and other things. No wonder we don't have the kind of policing that I advocate, firm but fair. That's all I'm saying, and I get a lot of abuse for saying that, but I believe in firm, fair policing, a bit like Peter was saying earlier about knives. You know, you've got to have it in this country, otherwise it's anarchy.
Di Davies, former Divisional Commander in the Metropolitan Police. I think a lot of people out there will be going hurrah and agreeing with you as they have their cup of tea in the morning. Now, we're joined by the Chief Legal Counsellor of the Free Speech Union, Brin Harris, for a counterpoint. Brin, we just heard from Di Davies there, who used to be a Divisional Commander in the Met. This is intolerable. These YOBs act with impunity. We need to clamp down and we need to beef up the law. What's your take?
Well, good morning. I very much agree with Mr. Davies that violence is unacceptable and the law must be upheld. The problem here isn't with the law as it exists. It's with the police not actually, in my view, understanding it. Now, we don't need the law to prohibit every nasty, unpleasant thing. We don't need a law against kicking, headbutting, scratching. You just need a law against assault. And it's the same here. We have already a legal prohibition against disorderly conduct that is likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress to those present. Now, likely, you know, these protests that we're seeing may well fall within that. Also, you know, our court considered, the High Court has considered, well, you know, sometimes if you're desecrating something that's, you know, very important to people, well, that may weigh on whether you are in your right to protest. So the problem is not with our existing law. And the real problem is that if you start saying that there are these particular forms of sort of nasty protest that we don't like to see, first of all, you're going to get difficulties of definition. Now, what if you get servicemen protesting, let's say when the Gurkhas protested about their lack of pension, you know, if they protested by a war memorial, is that going to be, you know, contrary to this new prohibition. And let's say the other thing. Let's say we now start a competition whereby governments, want to legislate to protect their specific sacred cows. The Tory party may legislate, let's protect war memorials, but then you may get the Labour Party in and saying, well, protest that never involves desecration or defacement of a holy book is not lawful. We don't want that arms in our legislation.
Okay, Bryn Harris, beg your pardon, Chief Legal Counsellor at the Free Speech Union. Thanks for joining us on Breakfast this morning. Let us know what you think out there. Di was very clear. We need a clamp down. And on the counterpoint was, be careful what you wish for, because those new laws could be used against servicemen.